Please be seated. I want to greet you all with the Lakota Ampe Tu Washte. Ampe Tu Washte. Maybe you could repeat after me. Ampe Tu?
Ampe Tu.
Good. Washte.
Washte.
And both? Ampe Tu Washte.
Ampe Tu Washte.
That's wonderful. Now that you've said it out loud in church, do you want to know what it means? Maybe I shouldn't tell you. It actually means good day. Simply good day. Ampe Tu Washte in the Lakota language, the language of the Oglala Sioux, which is my tribe. So if you get nothing else out of this sermon, at least you know how to say good day in Lakota. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. I visited this seminary once very briefly at the time of General Convention back in 2018, but this is the first time that I've ever actually stayed here and spent time with the faculty and the students, and it's just a joy. It's always a joy being back in the academic environment of a seminary. I don't get to do that nearly enough. It reminds me of my old days, 30-some years ago, at the old Seabury Western Theological Seminary, which I attended and graduated from when it was in Evanston, Illinois. I remember when I was doing my field education, my senior year, my father would call me up every Sunday because he knew I was at church doing field ed, and he wanted to know how it went, and so he would typically ask me, "So what was the good news today? Tell me what the good news was today." He'd do that every Sunday. And so I would think, oh, golly, now I have to think about something good to say. How can I do that? Something positive. But it got to the point where I was, anticipating that he would do that, and so I would have something good and positive to say to him ready to go. And there was actually some benefit to that. I was able to see the positive in virtually anything in Scripture. So, what's the good news today from two of the readings that we heard, Susanna and the Gospel of John? Well, there is good news there. There is a diamond in the rough, as it were. In the book of Susanna, we have a beautiful and righteous woman who is wrongly accused of carnal relations with a mysterious male who never really materializes. And the whole purpose for this is that there are two elder judges who actually want to do the same with her. And they approach her when she's bathing in the garden, and they proposition her, and she resists them because she is righteous. And their reaction to that was to frame her. Okay, if you won't do this with us, then we will accuse you of doing it with someone else. And the result of that is that you will be found guilty. Obviously, we're judges. And you'll be put to death. But God sees through that and works through a young man named Daniel in order to stop that injustice from happening. And Susanna is spared, whereas the elder judges who tried to frame her are found guilty for their lies and put to death. Susanna's blood was not shed on that day. So that is the good news, that God intercedes on behalf of those who are wrongly accused and prosecuted. And then we have in the Gospel of John the story of a woman who is caught in the act of adultery and is brought forward to be stoned to death. And the whole case is brought before Jesus, asking him what he thinks about it. And that's when he says, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone at her." And at that point, everybody drops their stones and walks away, and he announces that he does not condemn her either. The good news in this passage being that God is a God of forgiveness. God is a God of forgiveness. And the sin really doesn't matter so much as what comes afterwards. What do you do after you have sinned? Is there redemption? Is there restoration? Is there reconciliation? Is there healing in the relationship? And Jesus paves the way for that with the woman caught in adultery by saying, "I do not condemn you. Go and sin no more." Second chance. second chance. So this good news is that we can trust in God's ability to forgive and don't have to rely on our ability to be righteous. So trust in God's ability to forgive rather than your own ability to be righteous. So there's a lot of good news here. At the same time, it's shrouded, it's clouded by lamentable news. Lamentable news. And I think it's good that these two readings are taking place during the season of Lent because they call upon us as the community of faith to look within at who we have been, past, present, and who we might be in the future. And take a look at the works of our ancestors and what has happened as a result. We, as a body of faith, are in many ways convicted by these two readings. Convicted due to the manner in which we, as a people of faith over the centuries, have treated at least 50% of our members. How women have been treated in communities of faith, in the Judeo-Christian tradition and the Christian church, in the past and into the present day. We really stand convicted. We do. We are in need of forgiveness. We are in need of a new direction. We are in need of a second chance to move forward and right the wrongs of the past. We've come a way in doing that in recent years, but we have a long way to go because there is still so much injustice taking place around the world, in the church and in the world. I take a look at these two readings from an indigenous perspective as a Native American person. And I can tell you that these two narratives, the one of Susanna and the one of the woman caught in adultery, neither of these would ever be told within an indigenous community. They wouldn't be because it would have been unthinkable for our women to be in such situations. It never would have happened to begin with. Our societies were matriarchal. The women were in control. They were in charge of the villages and the communities. The men were basically hunters and gatherers, but when they came home, they were not the ones in charge of the households. The women were. The women held it together. And in those days, according to what our elders teach us, there were no incidents of domestic abuse or violence. It just didn't happen because the women were in control of the households. If a man was found to be treating his wife badly, mistreating her, she had the authority and the village's support to put him out. And he would have to leave, and there was nothing he could do about it. And so there was no domestic violence or abuse. Today, in indigenous communities, indigenous women experience the highest levels of domestic violence and abuse, statistically in proportion to the population. And the reason for that is colonization. The colonization of indigenous people and indigenous women in particular, who, when we were colonized by those coming from Western Europe, bringing with them the Judeo-Christian tradition, church people, we were taught that we had to change our culture and the way that we lived, which meant that women had their rights and their power taken away from them, stripped, and they had to be subservient to their husbands and their households, and didn't have the right to vote at that time. So indigenous women were taken out of their original context of power and authority and integrity and reduced to a status which was almost less than human. Can you imagine how devastating that was to experience that shift? And there were many who experienced it within their lifetime. and since. What is even more lamentable is that the church played a role in all of this happening. We did, beginning with the doctrine of discovery, through the colonization of Africa first and then the Western Hemisphere. The church worked hand in hand with European armies and governments, and later our own United States government, forcibly assimilating indigenous people into the dominant culture of the general American population. And the result of that is that we lost our souls. We lost our indigenous souls, and we're still fighting and working to try to recover them. That is where we all can come in. Each one of us must know this history, must know how our church contributed to it, and not be afraid to speak out, not to be afraid to tell the truth. Don't be silent about it. Silence is the worst thing we can possibly do. How does a people heal from genocide? How does a people heal from cultural assimilation? We were almost completely annihilated. How do we heal from that? I don't know how we heal from that. It might not even be possible. But if it is, it has to begin with telling the truth. Looking within ourselves, individually and corporately, this Lenten season. The great tragedy of the gospel is that it was brought to this hemisphere by Europeans, along with the narrative of white supremacy. Those two narratives knit together. That's why there are many to this day in our world who are white supremacists and consider themselves good Christians, and they don't see a conflict. We have not yet effectively separated those narratives from each other. And as long as that has not happened, the church will continue to play a role in colonizing and persecuting people who have been marginalized. Separating these narratives is our calling. It's our job to do. Are you up to the task? Well, that's the good news for today. Sometimes, the good news doesn't feel good. Sometimes it's painful. Sometimes it makes us sick to the stomach, honestly. But it's good nonetheless.